Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Rank Class. Today I will be talking about some history questions I've been asked by kids at work during the past few years. And I have picked out 3 examples of questions I've had. And I have been asked a lot of questions, but I find these 3 the most interesting of the questions, as you can still see the effect of the history today in those questions, showing that history is important so we know where we come from and where we're heading. So while eating, I was watching some news with the kids, and on the news they talked about North Korea. And they asked me, what is North Korea? So I pulled down a map, and then we talked about World War II. Before World War II started, Japan had taken over Korea. And then during the end of the war, Russia began to invade Japan as Stalin wanted a say in the peace talks. So he moved into Manchuria and into North Korea. After the war, like Germany, Korea was split into 2. In the north, Stalin put a puppet, the first member of the Jung family, and in the south, a democracy supported by the USA. And then in the summer of 1950, war broke out. The northern part of Korea attacked the southern part of Korea, and they overran the 38 parallel, and a proxy war began. China and Russia held the northern part, and USA and most of the United Nations joined in support of the democracy of the southern Korea. And 3 years of war began, and the war never ended. It's still only just a ceasefire. There's never been a peace, and there's still a lot of hostility. And the world often looks at what is going on there, since if a war starts in that part of the world, we don't know what will happen. Will China and Russia help North Korea? Or will North Korea have developed some sort of new bomb, or better bomb, other weapon of mass destruction that we don't know about, and they will then unleash it, and then a lot of people will die. And whatever happens, whoever supports who, we will have a massive amount of dead people and a massive amount of life lost. And North Korea is interesting because you can see how they in their daily life use propaganda and terror to keep their population in check, just like the Germans did during their time under Hitler. But we can hope that at some point peace will come to Korea again, so that the people of the north can begin to live again without fear of their life and without fearing to starve, since there's a clear contrast if you look at South Korea and North Korea. But Korea is just one of the wounds left from World War II. The Middle East is also still bleeding because of decisions made after World War II. The next thing, I was asked during a history class where they were talking about the USA, and they were talking about when USA got its independence from Britain. And I said, well, they did get help from France during this war of independence, and they didn't know that. And then I told them about how before the War of Independence we had the 7-year wars where France and Britain were fighting for control of the USA. The English ended up winning that war, and France was pushed back into Canada, and Britain took control of the USA. And due to the cost of the war, they had to increase taxes to pay for all the men and equipment, and that angered the USA, the colonies. And then the War of Independence began, and France, who were still competing with Britain over control of the world, saw this as a way to weaken the British. So they joined in and helped the USA. And it's kind of funny to think about, what if France actually won the 7-year wars? Would USA be France today, or would they still have rebelled? But it is sad to see how young people often forget that history is more than what we believe it to be. It's more than just the small fractions we actually are taught in school. There's a lot of it behind it that all adds up into this one point in time. where something changed due to something happening before it. And the history teacher actually told me that if she had time, she wanted to go all the way back to the 7 Years' War, but due to time restraints, they only had to talk about the USA becoming the USA. Some time after watching the news with North Korea, in the news for kids, there was a talk about Confederate statues in the USA southern states. And they asked me, why are some people so happy to tear down statues? And I had to talk to them about what the statues implied and how powerful history is. Since we've followed the news for some time, to talk about the statues, and they had to be removed. And it is crazy to see how many people in the southern states have a massive cry over the removal of these statues and names of bases and streets. And I had to tell them it all stems from the Civil War. It started over slavery, and the southern part wanted to keep the slaves. But after the war, some 20-ish years after the war, they began celebrating the generals and their achievements as a good thing, as they fought for their freedom and not to keep slaves. So history in those parts were warped into this idea that they didn't fight to keep slaves. They kept fighting for the rights of their states to decide on themselves what to do. And that is why we saw them fight over the statues, because they really truly believed that these generals were heroes in their mind. And when you believe something so much and then are faced with the reality, the real world, then you try to fight back to preserve that thing in your mind. And it's also sad to see how racism around the world, especially in the USA, is hard to talk about and to deal with, since people don't want to admit they're racist. But while trying to defend themselves, they just show how racist they actually are. And it is important to talk about racism because it's part of the history of the world. And we have to acknowledge if we've done something bad. Like even Denmark, where I live, sold slaves. And like the UK held half the world at some point in its grasp, doing some rather not nice things. But we can't just write the part of history out that we don't like, since it will just give us a false image of who we are and why we do what we do. And I have talked in previous episodes about why we need to talk about all the history, both the dark sides and the light sides, since we will literally shoot ourselves in the foot, making it easier to be manipulated by people who want to take advantage of us if we don't know our history and know the truth. And we tend to then do the same mistakes over and over. And history is a powerful tool if used right. And sadly, it's often used wrong, and then it becomes an even dangerous tool, since it warps the image of who we believe we are or what we do. I do hope this episode made you want to find out more about history. And if you want to listen to some more history episodes, I've made a few, and you can find them all in my podcast catalog. So feel free to listen to them as well. And if you want to chat with me, you can find me on Reddit, Facebook, Instagram, and Patreon. And if you want to find more episodes, you can find them on YouTube and all podcast sites. I wish you all a very nice day.